Welcome to Unmatched. I'm so excited today to welcome Ana Lorena Fabrega.
In 2019, I made the hard decision to leave the classroom and leave the system. Why do we do things the way we do? Why aren't we preparing kids for the real world? Why are they not interested? And all these questions sort of became my work. I would finish a unit of math and I had the students that aced the test. They aced the test, but then I'm like, okay, now we're going to do an open-ended problem where we're going to incorporate what we just learned in this unit. Blank. The self-confidence component is your job as a parent. You need to trust in the kids' ability and their curiosity that they will learn. Now is the time to allow kids and build a safe space for them to practice doing challenging things, not getting them right, failing, and then practice picking themselves up, managing their frustration, and then trying again. Because once they leave school, they need to keep learning for the rest of their lives.
Hi everyone, welcome to Unmatched. I'm so excited today to welcome Ana Lorena Fabrega, one of my favorite writers out there, one of the people that I would say about 2 years ago I started to follow and whose journey I'm so excited to have been from the outside, been part of. Ana, welcome to Unmatched.
Thank you so much, Ana, for that kind intro.
Ana is a very interesting personality, and I will let her introduce herself in a second. But here's my take on it. She's been part of a system, and she decided to get out of it to find her own way out of it. And by doing that, she also decided to share the journey with other people. There's a selfish reason why I'm interested in this, and that's because I'm a mom of 2 small kids. So maybe, Ana, you can introduce a little bit about your personal journey and where you are today.
Yeah. So my name is Ana Fabrega, and I'm originally from Panama, but growing up, I got to move around a lot because of my dad's job. So by the time that I was 14, I had lived in 7 different countries and attended 10 different schools. And so I really got to see and experience myself being a student in different schools around the world. So that's sort of where this interest in education sparked and started. And I guess we can get more into detail later, but basically, as I was growing up in all these different schools, I picked up on what to do and the little shortcuts and what I had to do in order to pass and appear as if I was learning and not get in trouble. And I knew that after 2 years, everything had an expiration. We would move on to the next place. And so I was a pretty good student, not necessarily because I was learning everything, but because I had figured out the system. And so really what happened was outside of school, my mom did a phenomenal job really maintaining that curiosity alive and enrolling me in different things and letting me explore. And I loved learning. I loved learning about absolutely everything and explaining things in ways that, according to my mom, captured people's attention. And so by the time I was older and I graduated high school, I did an internship at my dad's educational company, which brought different alternative education programs from around the world, from schools around the world that were doing things differently. And we would try to incorporate them in Panamanian schools. And so that was the first time that I was actually teaching students and working with students. And I loved kids and I found them fascinating. And, selfishly, I was like, this is what I want to do because I get to learn new things every day from them and teach them. And so, but I started to notice how hard it was to incorporate all these alternative programs into schools. And it was not just like one particular school, but like all schools, because they're so set in their ways and they have all this curriculum that they have to cover and like all the standards that there's really no space to prioritize these things like problem solving or like, creative thinking and things that are extremely important nowadays, right? And so I started to notice that, but I still wanted to become a teacher. So then I went on to study childhood education and special education and psychology at NYU. And that's where, while I was student teaching there, I got to see hundreds and hundreds of kids in different schools in New York. And it started to dawn on me. I was like, oh my God, these kids are playing the same game that I would play in school, which is, you raise your hand to get that participation grade. You know exactly what to say so you don't get in trouble. You don't question the teacher. You sit down quietly. Like all these things that in my book I called, the game of school, they were all doing the same thing. And it was, eye-opening and frustrating at the same time because that's when I started to realize like, wow, these kids are not engaged. They're not into their learning. They're not curious about what's going on. And so I started to notice now, not as a student, but sort of as an observer, all these issues with the school system. Then I went on to have my own classroom in New York, in Boston, in Panama, and that's when I really noticed. I tried my best to do things differently, but there was just so much I could do within the system. And even, I taught in different schools, really good schools, but still the system's so set in their ways that it's very hard for any individual to try to do things differently from within. And so again, loved working with kids. I loved the idea of teaching and learning, but it really wasn't satisfying to see that they were moving on from my classroom to then again lose that love for reading and for writing and for math and that understanding for why things work. And so finally in 2019, I made the hard decision to leave the classroom and leave the system. And I was convinced that this is something I had to do in order to pursue different ways of doing things, but I wasn't sure, what I was going to do next. I knew that I had to pivot, which, it's one of the reasons why it's so interesting to talk to you. But I wasn't sure where this was going to go or who I was going to talk to. And so that was the first time that I decided to start writing online. I had all these questions and, that's sort of what my writing is about. It's questioning things, right? Why are things the way they are? And trying to get to the root of those questions, but I don't have neatly packed answers, right? It's just sort of bringing to conscious all these things that were coming to mind. And a lot of it was questioning the system. And again, not criticizing teachers. I was a teacher, teachers are trying their best with what they can, but it's just the structure. And so I went back to, how did this start? Why do we do things the way we do? Why aren't we preparing kids for the real world? Why are they not interested? And all these questions sort of became the beginning of my work as a writer. And so I started to build an audience within the alternative education space. This was back in 2019. And I started to connect with a lot of people that were actually building things, new educational activities outside of the system. And so that was super interesting to me. And that's sort of what I've been doing. And I'm going to stop there since I've been talking for a while, but that's sort of what I've been doing for the past 3 to 4 years at this point. And I can get into more detail of what that looks like in a bit.
Absolutely. I have to say it's fascinating in so many, many ways. First of all, I have to say I connect so much with your story. I mean, I grew up in Eastern Europe, and the school system there is also very, very strict. There isn't much space for creativity, and I've always been a great student, an A student, but I do agree, and I love how you call it the school game. I think I've played the school game quite a lot myself because I knew exactly what would get me to, the best grade and then the next step and the next step. And here's why I'm so interested in speaking to you is because I feel that is the first step that takes us to the rest of our lives, right? What happens after you get out of the system once you're out of high school and then college is that you start working. Mm-hmm. And because you've trained yourself and the system has trained yourself to think into one direction, what happens is that the rest of your life and the rest of your career is simply a continuation of that game. Mm-hmm. that you're playing, right? You're not being incentivized to think outside of the box necessarily. You're not motivated to be yourself all the time. So I think I would love to get to the bottom of this and see what are the alternatives if we go back to the roots, because, our generation is what it is. We've learned a lot. There's been good and bad, and it is what it is, I would say. So I'm pragmatic about that. But having 2 small kids, I want to go to the root of this and figure out how we can help them, right? And I know you're a recent mom as well, by the way, congratulations.
Thank you.
So it's an amazing purpose to have, to talk about this. So the one thing that I wanted to ask you is, you've been a school teacher and now you call yourself an edupreneur. Tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah. So again, once I left the system, I was well, what do I do now? How do I connect with people that are already building things in the alternative education space? I can't do this alone. I need a community. Where's the alternative education community? And so the internet has been the most amazing ally for me. I was able to, again, through my writing, get to so many people around the world that shared the same ideas. And again, nothing that I say is brand new. Absolutely not. I'm just resurfacing a lot of what the alternative education giants have already spoken about, in many books and years ago. And so when I started connecting with all these people, I started to notice, okay, a lot of what looks like innovation in education is really just an iteration of of the same thing. So it's not really innovation, right? So a lot of people are creating apps with the best purpose in mind, right? But things to include in the system, to include in classrooms, and all these entrepreneurs are doing this. But really, I was a teacher and I got to use so many of these apps and so much of this tech, and the reality is that nothing felt revolutionary in the sense that nothing was really getting to the root of the problem. Like, kids are not motivated to learn. We're not cultivating that love for learning. They're not curious. They don't understand the connection between what they're learning and what they're going to need it for. They have a hard time solving real world problems because, again, everything feels like a game in school. And so I was like, a lot of these apps just facilitate the teacher's role, or maybe an easier way to assess students, or a way for them to memorize certain things, but it wasn't quite changing anything. So I was like, I want to be an edupreneur, meaning like I want to create new learning experiences, but that are outside the system, right? Not build on top of what's already there, because I don't believe that that's going to change anything. And so I was like, well, I'll call that an edupreneur. And again, it's sort of like a term that sparked, and a lot of it involves asking those hard questions and voicing those hard questions, and with the hope that people will start to think about education in a new way. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be very drastic and pull your kids out of school immediately and this and that, but as long as you are thinking about it and questioning it, that's a first step. So a lot of my work revolves around that, and I do that through writing. And then in terms of the learning experience, I did join a startup from the very beginning called Synthesis, which I can talk about in a bit. And I think that what the work that we're doing there is actually really groundbreaking. And there are a bunch of edupreneurs there.
So if I understand correctly, in other words, what you're, let's say, motivating parents to do is to think outside of the box when it comes to their kids' education, and not necessarily take the kids out of the system, but build on top. So compensate a little bit what, you feel the system is missing with additional ways of incentivizing and motivating kids to learn. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. But there's also a big community of parents that already don't have their kids in the system, or that actually, maybe they do want to pull their kids out of the system. I'm just saying that that's not the only option you have. Like, it's like a spectrum, right? Like, on one hand, you have like the parents that have to drop off their kids in a traditional school, and that's just the way it is because that's what works for their family. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have like the unschoolers, right? Then you have like the homeschoolers sort of like in the middle, but you have like those two extremes. My work really is, I target all that category, because there's always something you can do regardless of where you stand in that spectrum, right? You just have to know what your alternatives are, which I've realized that there's not that much information out there of what your choices are, right? It's a very niche community. And there are many parents that are questioning the system, or that are concerned about the system, but they just don't know where to go, who to listen to, or where to look. So I try to be that voice, unbiased voice, to talk about, well, I was in the system for many years and I loved what I did. I saw it did not work. And so when I started exploring, these are sort of like a lot of the options that I've come across. And so that's why I write a newsletter that's for free, that I used to send every single Friday religiously since I had my baby. I've been sort of taking a break this year. But that's what I cover in my newsletter. Whenever I come across something that I'm like, parents would benefit from learning about this exciting, either online opportunity, or this boot camp, or this micro school concepts. And I try to distill it in a way that is comprehensible, that it's interesting, and put it out there in the world for free, because I feel like, everyone deserves to know what their options are. And so, yes, I guess, and we'll get to that, but I ended up writing a book about this, and my book is really for any parent that's curious about understanding where our system came from, why we do things the way we do, and then how kids really learn, and what we can do wherever you are in that spectrum to enhance and help them, become successful, happy individuals in this ever-changing world.
That's amazing. And I have to say, having lived in 3 different countries so far, I can say the culture and the systems are very different from country to country. So for example, now I'm living in Germany and homeschooling is not a big thing. right? So it's almost like, for me, in my personal case, it's about really building on top of the system, because that's mandatory for everyone. And then I think what I've come across through your content and your newsletter, and obviously now your book, is really understanding what the alternatives are and how you can bring those into our kids' education. So that's super, super exciting for me. You mentioned synthesis, and I would love for you to talk to us a little bit. You are chief evangelist at Synthesis, and as far as I know, it's a new online learning experience for kids that has been built on the basis of Ad Astra, which is a school that your co-founder started with Elon Musk, I think, for his own kids and a bunch of other kids in his community. So tell us a little bit, what is Synthesis and what makes it different than any other learning opportunities out there?
Yeah. So Elon Musk, like many of us, was very concerned about what his kids were learning in school, or should I say, like, what they were not learning in school. He was very interested in having them become, problem solvers and enjoy learning, and get and giving them real challenges, not like textbook challenges that are wishy-washy. Like no, like the real thing. And so he hired Josh Dunn, our co-founder at Synthesis, and to start a lab school at SpaceX for his kids and other kids of SpaceX families. So this was back in 2014. And he just gave him two parameters. He was like, create a school that has no grade levels, because like many of us, he understands that by grouping kids into the same age groups, you are really limiting their learning experiences and their social experiences. Well, first of all, when in the real world do you only interact with people your age? That's not a thing. So I don't know why we do it in school. And second of all, you're putting a speed limit whenever you do that. Whenever you say, you're 10 years old, so you're going to learn math up to here, because that's how much we learn in third grade. When you turn 11 and you go to fourth grade, then you can learn this and this. That's very silly, because as you know, we all mature at different rates. And when you give kids, and this is something that we see so much at Synthesis and what fascinated me from the start, when you give young kids a challenge, even if you think, because we have all these preconceptions, oh, they're not going to be able to do this. This is for 18 years old or adults, but you give it to them and you give them that opportunity and you say, I know you can figure this out, go for it. You will be surprised at what they can do when you don't put that speed limit. So Elon was like, you know what? I don't want grade levels, mixed age groups, don't give them a speed limit. Let's see how much they can do when you give them a real challenge. And it was all problem-based, game-based approach where kids could actually like play games and learn through games. And so it was phenomenal, like the level of motivation that the students had, the things that they were learning at the pace that they were learning, it was just off the charts. And so people around the world would visit the school and would say, this is amazing. How can we bring this to kids from all over the world? So our other co-founder, Chrisman Frank, he worked at Class Dojo at the time, an educational, like another ed tech company. He visited the school and he was like, okay, I'm a software engineer. We need to grab these simulations from this course called Synthesis, which was their most popular class, all problem solving. And we're going to put it online and we're going to give access to kids from all over the world. Let's see what happens. And so that was one of the beta testing sessions that they invited me to join to see the product. And I was just mind blown because they're giving kids, it's like these simulations where you give kids like real world problems and you don't give them instructions, very different from school. You just let them figure out the rules and figure out how to play and how to solve these big problems. We teach them mental models and we teach them communication skills and we teach them how to question assumptions and how to come up with their own conclusions about things and test them and fail. And it sounds silly, but we give them practice with fail over and over again, something that, again, kids don't have access to in school. And so the outcome was just amazing. The kind of conversation that 8-year-olds were having, like 8 through 14, but like the 8-year-olds just blew my mind because it showed what can happen when you empower kids with a real challenge and you just give them the tools and the space to show you what they can do. And so I was like, this is mind blowing. Like the kids are at the edge of their seats, even though they're in a computer. It's not passive at all. Like they can't even sit down. They're so excited and they're so into the games and they're coming up with this like answers to problems that even adults have a hard time coming up with. And so that was just the beginning. Like I knew that this team, these two guys, I was like, they actually understand how to do things differently. Remember that I told you at the beginning that I had spoken to a lot of educator innovators that were really just building upon the system. these guys were just thinking outside of the box and from first principles, like really deconstructing what does it mean to teach and learn, what kids should be learning nowadays, how do kids learn, how do we motivate them, how can we create learning experiences that they actually want to be part of, and then how do we include them in the process of what we're going to do next, right? Because we're doing this for them with the idea that they understand and can apply the things that they're learning to the real world. And so it started off just as competitive team games in the simulations. That was year one. We launched it, and when they invited me to join, it was just them two, and I joined as their chief evangelist to sort of spread the message of what they were doing, and since then it's become a world. Like we just launched because we were targeting the soft skills, right? Sort of what would be considered an enrichment program. But we always knew that we wanted to get to the core subjects as well. So eventually, 3 to 5 years from now, our goal is to become like a real, one shop for all, where kids learn the core subjects through the synthesis tutor, which we recently launched this year. And it's incredible. And it covers STEM subjects like math, complexity science, and we're going to cover engineering and physics and all the core subjects. And then we have the competitive team games where kids actually get to practice all this social and enrichment, skills. And so for me, this is groundbreaking. And what I love is that we don't have the answers. We're building as we go. We involve parents and, what they think that their kids need nowadays. We incorporate all the feedback that we get from our students. We incorporate our students in the process of building the lessons and the games and the simulations. And so it's really amazing. And we're always willing to pivot when something's not working and willing to learn from other people and what they're doing. And that's what I love. That's the kind of environment that I want to be part of, where there's always room to keep on building and switching gears when what we're doing is not working. I did not have the chance to do that when I was in the school system.
How do you measure the success of the program, considering there are no grades? How do you measure the development of the kids? I'm trying to think out of the box here, but I feel like there's a parallel because, in leadership today, I feel we're trying to re-educate ourselves. Mm-hmm. So sort of like the small kids in us that were taught to compete with others for grades continue to compete throughout the years in our careers, right? And now we're talking about this concept of you're not in competition with others, you're only in competition with yourself, mm-hmm. right? There's this, very new age concept spreading around. So I'm thinking, what is the best way to motivate kids to learn without feeling the pressure that the grade is placing on them? Is competition healthy in between kids? Or is it a matter of just looking inside and in oneself and sort of like trying to develop from there?
So I'm going to answer that question, or try to answer that question in two sections. I'm going to target first the assessment part, the grades part, and then the competition side. So in terms of the assessment and the grades, what has happened with the traditional school system is that because we've imposed this, and of course we need a way to measure progress, of course. The problem is that the way that we've done things is that the assessments and the grades have become the center of the entire education process. And that has caused the whole thing to go sideways. So if you enter a school now, everything revolves around test prep, around the grades. There's schools competing against each other to get the highest scores and, like the different states. And you have the kids preparing since they enter school for the end of the year test. And you have the teacher's salary tied, and this is at least in American schools, right? Tied to the assessment of their students. So like everything revolves around that. And what we've noticed is that really diminishes the motivation for students to learn for the sake of learning, which is what we want them to do, right? Because once they leave school, they need to keep learning for the rest of their lives, right? And there are not going to be assessments, unless you're doing some type of formal learning, they're not going to be assessments that they're going to be giving you. And it sounds silly, but this is a skill that you need to develop not develop because you're born with this, but schools squash it once you enter in. So it's a skill that you need to nurture through, this like desire to keep learning and this curiosity to keep learning. And so assessments really, what they do is they penalize you when you get something wrong. And the whole idea, especially when you're kids, is like you're learning, you're going to get things wrong. It's part of the learning process. And so when you penalize that with a bad grade that goes in your report card that then gets sent to your parent and you're marked and this is what you're going to use to get to college, like all this thing, it causes all this anxiety because the stakes are so high that kids don't want to even try things because they can fail, they can get that F. And so it starts to put this underlying pressure on learning that's very negative. And so we are trying to be very, very, and there's a lot more to unpack there. I have like an entire chapter about this in my book where I really go into detail on assessments, what's gone wrong, and then how do you actually use them effectively? Because of course we do need a way to measure, and then some ideas of how we could measure kids learning without using like grades. But that's something separate. So the way we've done it at Synthesis is we're like, okay, we want to be very careful not to fall into that trap. But we also want to find a way to track what students are doing for themselves, and so that, parents also understand what's going on, and so that they can show in the future, like, oh, I did Synthesis, here are the things that I've learned. And so we're still developing what this looks like. But what we tell parents all the time is like, and I'm a big believer in this, like when your kid is learning, they're learning. Like you can tell by the kinds of conversations they're using at home. We teach them a lot of mental models through the simulations. Like how are they applying these mental models to the real world? And we actually provide parents with like questions and different things that they can ask their kids to see how they can apply what they're learning to the real world. And what's surprising is that if you do that with kids that go to school, like after the test, most of them just like forget the content. Or like I would finish a unit of math and I had the students that aced the test. They aced the test, but then I'm like, okay, now we're going to do an open-ended problem where we're going to incorporate what we just learned in this unit. Blank. They don't know how, and I'm like, how is this even possible? They got an A in the test. Like, how can you not transfer this knowledge to a real problem, which is the whole point of learning anything, right? And so big red flag. At Synthesis, it's like the opposite. Kids don't feel the pressure like, oh, you're doing this and we're testing you. Like they can see how they keep going up in levels because it's sort of structured like a video game in that sense, that kids keep moving up depending on how they succeed at each challenge. They move up, they move up, they move up. And same with the digital tutor. The digital tutor, what it does is depending, you can go as fast or as slow as you go, and it's endlessly patient. So it's going to be there for you. Every time you make a mistake, it's not going to get upset at you or say, no, we need to move on. I have 30 students. No, it's there for you until you truly understand the concept. And so it's adaptive. So in the digital tutor, it's pretty easy to see what your kid is mastering and what they're accomplishing because it's by sections. With the team games, it's sort of the communication skills that they're developing and the way that they are thinking through problems and problem solving, their frustration levels. Like it's more soft skills. And that's the portion that we're trying to find a way to graph it without giving them a grade. We're never going to give grades, but a way to sort of keep track of it so that the students can go back. So for example, we record the students playing the games and then we send short clips of the students to parents so that the kids and the parents can see how Oana handled this moment where she was stuck, she failed, she had no idea what to do, and she was, under pressure. Like, look how she reacted. Then a month later, oh my gosh, Oana got stuck here again, but no, now look at how she's handling this problem. She's way more calm. She's able to ask her peers for this. So like you start to see how this skills progress and the way that the kids are managing, again, situations that they're going to face in the real world through these games and through these recordings.
So it's basically like a before and after sort of evaluation, right? So you can actually track over a period of time the development.
Absolutely. And every day we're working on this, by the way. So we have a team that's like solidly focused on that. But again, we're going slow because we really want to be careful not to fall into, the trying to measure everything and therefore losing the essence of what we're doing. And so that's that part. And then in terms of the competitive side, yes, you're competing against yourself, but like in the real world, like that's the new trend. And I can see that. But the reality is that you are also, you're collaborating, but you're also competing against others. And that's part of the real world. And that's just part of, in the startup world or in really in any kind of world, like you need to collaborate and you need to compete. And so it teaches you, the way that we do it, it teaches you to compete in a healthy way, but particularly the collaboration piece. Sometimes, you need to be a leader, but sometimes you need to know when to shut up and, be a listener. And so this kind of things is what we're trying to target so that any kid can leave Synthesis being an excellent collaborator, but also knowing how to get on top and how to compete, not just against yourself, but against, the world.
One of the biggest things for me in raising my kids, and I hope that I'm going to do a good job with that. I'm trying every day, trying my best, is self-confidence. because I think it's such an important thing. Apart from all the skills that you're going to accumulate throughout, your life, and the time that you're in school or in whatever system, and then throughout the time that you're going to be learning on the job, as they say, at every job that you're going to take, the one thing that is going to make you successful while you fail and while you succeed is your self-confidence. And I feel that, my generation at least, and especially where I'm coming from, self-confidence was something that was very much squashed by the school system because of exactly what you explained. It wasn't easy to be curious. It wasn't easy to be motivated. It wasn't easy to be yourself. It wasn't easy to be creative in any way. You had to literally follow every step of the process. And whenever you failed, that was a big red flag for your parents, for the school, for yourself. And it created, I think, a lot of the reason why therapy is so on trend right now, because there's a lot of things that we need to fix there. Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about how do we build self-confidence in kids in a way that is healthy, that is also challenging, allowing them to develop those skills that you were talking about, but without actually putting the negative pressure that we are used to.
Oh, Anna, I love it. I don't think I've ever been asked this question, and I absolutely love this question. By the way, small parenthesis, the fact that you're concerned about you being a good mom already makes you a good mom because you are actively thinking about it and doing something about it. So just wanted to share that. But the world that we live in is filled with adversity, challenge, hard moments, hardship, and it is our job as parents. And I say this to every parent that asks me, like, what's the one thing that I can do? And honestly, build their self-confidence, because you cannot delegate this to school. Even if you have to delegate the education because you can't handle this at home or whatever it is, the self-confidence component is your job as a parent. You cannot drop your kid off school and expect for the teacher to take care of that. Because unfortunately, even when you have a great teacher, teachers have 30 kids, a lot of subjects to cover, and a lot of stuff to do. Unfortunately, building the kids' self-confidence is not one of the priorities. And so parents can do many, many things. But one of the things that we've noticed with kids is that the fear of failure and the lack of practice failing has a lot to do with how they feel about themselves. And it sounds very simple, but think about it. Kids need practice, just like with everything. And the way you develop skills is by practice. Kids need practice failing when the stakes are low. And when are the stakes low? When they're kids. So all this notion of putting like this grades that, again, go on your report card and that are going to end up impacting you in the future is a big mistake, because if they don't have a chance to practice failing safely now, then when are they going to do it? When they're adults, and it can mean affect your marriage or a failed business or those are high stakes failures. So now is the time to allow kids and build a safe space for them to practice doing challenging things, not getting them right, failing, and then practice picking themselves up, managing their frustration, and then trying again. And this is not something that you build overnight. You need to practice this over and over and over and over again until you become confident in your ability to handle failure. And so there are a lot of things that help with this, like many parents are against video games. I find video games fascinating in moderation. One of the things that video games teach you is to pick yourself up after you fail. If you look at kids playing video games, they don't get, yes, they may get a little bit frustrated, but they're like, oh, I'll try again, start again. And they'll try, and then they'll fall, they'll die, they'll try again, and they'll try again until they achieve the next level. And so that's giving them practice with failure. At Synthesis, we're all about that. Like, our games are extremely challenging, even for adults, you fail a number of times in each session. And kids, our students are so used to it, they don't even get frustrated. Maybe a little bit, but they're like, I get to try again. This time I get to try again smarter. Now I already know how to do this and this and this, and it's not a big deal. I'll just pick myself up and keep going. So that's one thing, giving your kids plenty of opportunities to fail in safe spaces, and then walk them through their emotions when they're going through that, and explaining, hey, it's fine. This is what happens. What are you going to do next? Or what are you going to do different next time? And you can do that in many different ways. Also, sports are great for that because, they experience that a lot. And so that's one thing. The other thing is the ability and the confidence to figure things out for themselves. One of my biggest frustrations with school is that everything is scripted and everything comes with instructions, or most of the things, right? Like there's an answer, and so lesson plans are step by step, and it teaches kids to expect somebody to tell them what to do all the time or to have the instructions all the time, and they don't have the confidence to just figure things out for themselves. And again, this is also a skill that you need practice in. And so the way that we do it again at Synthesis is we throw them in the games, we never give them the instructions. And they are super frustrated at first. They're like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know what to do. And we're like, well, but I believe in your ability to figure it out. And so what happens, and I'm not saying that Synthesis is the only way you can do this, but it's one of the best examples I've seen, is that kids begin to realize, oh, you know what? I'm approaching something that I've never seen before, but I can figure this out. I just have to spend some time, and maybe I'll get some things wrong, but I'll be able to do it. That is such an important skill as an adult, to show up to somewhere new, which is going to happen all the time, and trust and have the confidence that you can figure it out even though you know nothing about it. And again, it sounds silly, but it's very, very common. And one of the reasons why we have very unsecure adults is because they don't trust their ability to figure things out, or they don't try new things because they fear failing and they don't know how to manage that failure. So those are two things that parents can really cultivate and try, with kids. And in my book, again, I have a whole section in the book that talks about this and that gives you examples of specific things that you can do with your children to prepare them for these specific things. And that all builds their self-confidence. And again, these are just two examples. And then one more thing that I'm going to say, just I'm very passionate about this question that I've never been asked before, but every kid is unique and has an aptitude for something. It may not be obvious in school, right? Because maybe it's not an academic aptitude. However, they're really good at something. And that is also the parent's job to figure out since they're young, what is my kid exceptionally good at and loves doing? And again, you can't delegate this to school. They're not going to do it. This is something that the parent does. And then once you have that, I tell parents, be the perfect enabler. Be there to support whatever it is. It can be something that you're like, well, how are they going to make a living out of this? If you love something enough and you're willing to put in the hours and, work hard at it, you will figure out how to make a living out of it. You just have to, and for that, you need a parent that supports you, that supports your crazy ideas, and that believes and values whatever it is that your kid is interested in. And you see that with very, very successful entrepreneurs. When you look at, and I'm very interested in this topic, so I've researched their parents and what their parents did, what's the common factor, and it's that they all supported their kids' obsessions. As crazy or as silly as they seemed, that builds their confidence in a way that turns into happy, successful adults.
I cannot say how much I love what you just said because, that's the whole point of Unmatched, by the way. And I feel like you've just opened my eyes to why I'm doing this. I feel like I'm trying to rescue myself and sort of my generation out of that storyline, that we've all collectively been part of. And being now where we are in our 30s, 40s, maybe still a little bit insecure, maybe part of a system that we don't understand, maybe finally reaching a point where we kind of want to know who we really are. Mm-hmm. And then the big question mark is, who are we? Mm-hmm. And my strong belief is that everyone is unmatched. Just as you said, kids are unique. We're all unique in our ways, but somehow we forgot about it because maybe, the society at the time, the school system, the parents didn't have so much education as we do now and so much awareness on this topic. So it is now up to us to kind of pull ourselves up and figure out again, who we are and what we stand for and sort of what our personal positioning is, just like in branding, which is my favorite topic. So I love that you said that because I'm a super big believer in the fact that we really need to start the kids very young on understanding and giving them their confidence in themselves and being the ones that notice what they're good at and what they're actually unique at, as you said. So the question is, though, and I'll be very honest here, is I'm sure you're a very busy woman as well. You're now a mother. You have this business that you're doing. You just launched a book. I guess same as every mom out there and every parent out there, we are overwhelmed with so much that we need to do in our day-to-day. that sometimes I question myself is, when do I get the time to do this such crucial job that we have, which is being the best parent and the best enabler for our kids? How do you do it?
Right. So I don't think I have a clear-cut answer for this. I don't believe anybody does. However, something that I like to share with parents, because a lot of parents have this concern. And now as a mom, I mean, I guess I don't have it as much because I realized something by being a teacher and being in the system. The first thing is that kids don't need to be in school in order to learn. I know that that's sort of the message that we've gotten throughout our entire lives. Like, learning happens in school. You need to send your kid to school with a teacher, and he has to, or she has to be there for X amount of hours, X amount of. No. Again, as a teacher, I'm telling you, the amount of teaching and learning that goes on is very small. And then whatever we do teach and learn, it's very sad, but most of them forget after the test. And so I'm not concerned about the fact, like, when you look at kids, and I've studied a lot, kids and their nature and their brain and how they're born, they have this natural curiosity and drive to learn. That's how we're built. That's how we're born. If you look, and I'm looking at my 8-month-old right now, he's curious about absolutely everything. He wants to learn about absolutely everything. And so it's a beautiful thing to watch unfold. And parents usually want to intervene and say, okay, I need to sit down with them, and I need to start teaching them the colors and start teaching them and this, like, and a lot of it is created by us, like this pressure, and by, by this age, they need to know how to read, and by this age, they need to know how to multiply. It's all like human self-constructed. And if you look at other countries and how they've done it, there's some countries like Finland where kids don't go to school until they're 7. And they literally don't, they just don't enter the system until they're 7. They're playing around, they're exploring, they're doing this. And then when you compare those 7-year-olds with the 7-year-olds in the US that have been in the system since they were in pre-K, you see that the kids in Finland are way more curious. They're excited to learn. They know a lot of things. They didn't go to school yet, but they know a lot of things because we need to trust that they are learning. And I'm a big advocate for self-directed learning. And again, you need to trust in the kids' ability and their curiosity that they will learn. Maybe not at the rate that you want them to learn or at the rate that school wants them to learn, but they will learn. You see this with reading. You have kids that, they're not reading by 6 years old, but they learn how to read by 8 or 9 or 10, and then they love reading and they can't stop reading. You see kids in school that they're forced to learn a certain way by 6. They learn how to read. They hate reading. They don't want to read because they associate it with this negative feelings and with the grades in school, and it's like they don't want to read. So what's more worth it, right? Like this kid that takes longer but then loves reading and reads to learn and just has that like desire, or the kid that learned, forced, but then he doesn't want to read again. And so what I'm trying to say is, and it's hard to convey this because, again, I lived through it, so I'm not concerned about it in a way. Like, kids are learning. If you give them this space and you give them the resources, which, again, I talk a lot about this in my book, like what things that you can do at home. But it's just trusting that they can figure a lot of these things out. There are a lot of resources out there that you can use that are not time consuming for you. You don't need to be there the entire time. You don't have to be the teacher the entire, no. Like, you need to just provide them with the space, the resources, and encourage them, and they can do a lot by themselves. And so as long as, and you incorporate them in the community so that they can share their stuff with other kids. Now, the internet is a wonderful resource for them to connect with other communities online and share their work and do things with whatever it is that they're building and creating. And so what I'm trying to say, and again, it's hard to convey the feeling, but it's like, just trust that learning will happen, even if you don't have to be strictly teaching them things. And so, and the other thing is, if your kid is going to school and your kid is happy and succeeding and comes back home and wants to tell you about what they're learning and this and that, then by all means, like that's great. And that happens for many kids. That's how my husband is. He's like, he loved school, and he then, he married this like rebel educator. And so now we've both sort of like started to see, and it's great because I get to see his side and he gets to see my side. And so now we're like, okay, we're going to come to a middle ground with our baby. But the thing is, if you see your kid though, and your kid is unhappy, or your kid is unfulfilled, or he or she is having feelings of, like lack of self-worth, or I'm not smart, or I don't know what I'm good at, then you need to intervene. And that's the moment where you should consider really the alternatives. And again, that's the parent's responsibility. So again, not an easy answer, but hopefully something that calms you down, that you don't have to be there 24/7 or doing that. No, you just have to sort of do the research, prep the space, and then give them time. Like, creativity requires time unbothered, not an adult telling you what to do and supervising you, but just like, time to figure things out, right? And what you like and try things. And so for that, you don't need somebody supervising you all the time. You know what I mean?
Completely agree. Although it's difficult because, especially for parents that come from the system, breaking out from what we have learned our entire lives is the hardest thing. And I can tell you that I personally battle with myself every day to make myself not be drawn in what I know to be true or what I know to be right, and allow my kids to be a little bit freer to make decisions and to come up with their own way of thinking. So I can say it's pretty challenging. I can imagine a lot of parents are going through the same thing. One question that I have for you is around using tech with kids. You briefly touched upon that, and you mentioned, the benefits of video games. I know you wrote a super interesting piece in one of your newsletters about video games and how they actually benefit in moderation, as you said, that kids use them. Can you talk to us a little bit more broadly about tech, especially now with AI and, all sorts of technology that is coming in? I think one of the biggest questions that my husband and I sort of discuss all the time is, how much is too much? How much TV is too much? How many video games is too much? How much access to a computer is too much, or to mobile phones? So for example, right now with my 5-year-old and my 3-year-old, they're not allowed to touch the phone. I have a complete phobia against them having the mobile phone in their hands and watching the little screen. But I'm not so concerned about TV and video games. I feel like that's a little bit different on the bigger screen. But what's the more professional point of view on this topic?
Oof, this is a big one, and there's a lot to unpack, and we could do a whole podcast episode about this. I'm going to just try to touch upon some of the things that I think are worth sharing with you right now. So one of the first things you need to know about technology and screens and everything, it's that there's a big psychological component to it. And so parents feel, mainly because we ourselves are very much addicted to our phones. Like most people are, we're addicted to our phones. And so we have this underlying guilt. We feel we have this huge bag of guilt on top of us whenever we think, it happens to me with my baby right now. My baby's 8 months old, and I was like, I don't want to introduce, TV yet because it's a baby. But sometimes he doesn't want to drink his milk, and there's no way. And then suddenly, when there's a screen up, he'll look and he'll have the entire bottle. So I'm like, So the problem is that we carry all this, guilt. Like, oh my gosh, what is this doing to my baby? And what is this? And so we are passing that guilt to the kids, especially when they're a little bit older. They start to associate, okay, there's something wrong with technology because my mom gets so much anxiety and frustrated and gets mad whenever I'm watching TV or whenever I'm doing this. And so they start to associate, and we need to face it. Screens and technology is not going anywhere. In fact, it's just going to become a bigger part of our lives. So it is our role as parents to teach kids how to navigate it in moderation and how to use it appropriately and effectively. We cannot do that if we are sort of like making it the enemy, right? And again, kids pick up on our guilt and pick up on our, we're scared. We're scared that we don't know what the long-term effects of screen in kids, because screens are fairly a new thing. We don't know, there's a lot we don't know. What we do know is that it's going to be here for a while. So the first thing that we need to do as parents is to befriend the technology and put safe limits. And so whenever you're talking about screens, don't make it the enemy. It's not like, no. Or sometimes we're like, the kids have been playing for a while and you realize, oh my gosh, they've been playing for an hour. Put that off. And then you start, you get really upset. What does a kid pick up? Okay, there's something bad about this. There's something. So no, you maybe approach them. You sit down next to them. Oh, show me what you've been playing. You do this for 30 seconds. Okay, we're going to put this away now. And then, screens are meant and they're built. Everything that has to do with to feel like it's not enough. You're scrolling through your phone, 30 minutes go by, it doesn't feel enough. 3 hours go by, it doesn't feel enough. You're watching Netflix, you watch 10 episodes, it never feels enough. Screens are designed to feel that way. So we just have to come to terms with that and know that our kids are going to feel the same way. And so what we can do is put limits. And we can say, okay, you're going to play this video game. We come to an agreement. How many? Let's do two 2 levels. Once you get to 2 levels, we're going to stop. And so the kid already has a number. So after 2 levels, it's not going to become a fight. Or you say, you're going to watch this movie for 30 minutes and then you're going to come back to tomorrow. So the kid already knows, okay, 30 minutes. So by the time the 30 minutes, they may complain a little bit. It's normal. It doesn't feel enough, but you already set that agreement. So that's like a healthy and friendly way to start to set boundaries so that they can learn how to self-regulate. And like we were talking earlier, people need practice, like kids need practice with failure, with, figuring things out. They also need practice with how to handle technology and how to handle screen time. So that way you're teaching them how to self-regulate, which is our biggest job when it comes to screen. Also, modeling the behavior. If you're always on your phone or you're always watching TV, and then, kids pick up on everything we do. So how are you going to then ask them to stop doing something when they're like, mom and dad do it all the time? Everyone around me does it all the time. So again, it's like about befriending technology, helping them set healthy boundaries, model the behavior, and then try to find out what it is. And this is what the article that I wrote, I was very interested in why some kids are so drawn to video games and they seem to not be interested in anything else and they just want to do that. And that's one of the biggest complaints I get from parents. Like, what do I do with my kid? My kid only wants to play a video game. They're not interested in anything else. Well, have you stopped to think what it is that they're so into? Like, have you had a conversation with them? Is it the social aspect? Is it the challenge? Is it the adrenaline? Is it the fact that they're getting better at, like, what is that? And then talk to them about it. Have them vocalize that so that they realize too what it is that draws them to that. And then try to find things outside of video games, whether it is in the real world, where they can have that feeling, where they can feel that same thing that they love so much, whether it is maybe soccer or playing the piano, whatever it is, you help them find that in the outside physical world. So that's another thing. And then there's a whole section of gaming in my book because I was very interested in the research behind and the benefits of gaming and then also the side effects. There's very little, there's a limit of 21 hours a week. I don't know if you've heard this, but for kids and after, up to 21 hours, which seems like a lot. And I'm not saying that they have to play for 21 hours. I'm just saying for kids that are really into it, up to 21 hours, there's actually no negative research out there that shows that it can be a bad thing or detrimental for kids. And so also figuring out, and again, this is the parents' job, figuring out with what kind of mindset they're playing. Are they playing to have fun or are they playing to escape something, the escapist mentality? And so if they're trying to escape something, it's very important. That's when it can start to cause problems. It's very important as parents to understand, well, what is it? And intervene and then try to figure out how can we fix that? Because usually they're, when they play video games or when they're using screens or when they're trying to compensate for something that they're not getting in the real world. So in my book, I talk about autonomy. In school, kids have very little autonomy, right? They're being told what to do all the time. They don't really have choices over the subjects or the way they learn things. Like they're always been told what to do. They get home, they suddenly get to play a game and they're like, or watch TV. They get to choose what they watch. They get to, see what app they want to use, or they get to choose what video game and have all these choices of the character, the level, this. It feels good. We all need to feel autonomy. So if kids are not getting autonomy during their day, they're going to look for it somewhere else. And then this idea of competence, which to me is the most interesting. In school, again, things are set up in a way that many kids never feel competent. Why? Because it's not the way that they learn, or, it hasn't been explained to the extent that they need, or for whatever reason. So they don't experience that sense of, oh, I'm very good at this. That is very concerning. And again, parents need to be on the lookout for this, because if a kid is not experiencing that feeling of competence, they're going to find it somewhere else. And it may be something positive, it may be something negative. So, maybe they come home and they see video games and they're like, I'm so good at this. I want to keep playing because I feel good. I'm learning this. I'm doing this. So again, there's that. And then the feeling of relatedness. People think, and this is one of the biggest controversial topics, oh, I don't want to homeschool, or I don't want to, because of the social aspect. And I'm like, well, do you think your kids are socializing a lot in school? If you walk into schools, at least in America nowadays, like recess has been cut back. Many schools have started doing quiet lunches because things were getting, in elementary school, because things were getting too out of control. What? Like they're kids. And so, and obviously in the classroom, the teacher's teaching, kids can't really talk. There's very little time to mingle and talk about things. It's like everything's structured. So kids are not really properly socializing. When you ask them, they're like, oh yeah, at recess or in the bus. And so when they're playing video games, for example, many of them are you can talk to other people, you can interact, you can do this. And so many kids are super drawn to them because they feel that sense of connectedness. So at Synthesis, we have so many kids that now have friends all over the world that have become really good friends, because you're like, oh, I have this friend in India that's interested in dinosaurs just like me. In my classroom here, nobody's interested in dinosaurs, or nobody, so like they start to create these bonds that maybe they don't have in the physical world. And so that's one of the reasons why parents are like, oh, they're addicted, but they're not really addicted. They're just seeking for what they're not getting in the real world. So this whole story, and again, I can go on and on and on about this topic, but to show that there's a big psychological component behind this, and a lot to unpack, and a lot to question, and a lot we can do as parents to help them navigate this world, starting by not making it the enemy.
And I do think it's fascinating, because on one side is not making it the enemy, but on the other side, it's also not making it the nanny. Because as you said, there's a big component of escapism in kids, because one of the bigger reasons is that we're all very busy, we're all running around, we're all overwhelmed. I mean, me included, I won't lie. But the one thing that I never want to do is use the TV to be the nanny, of my kids when I'm just too overwhelmed to deal with them. So I guess I'm pretty sure that's another component that, that don't let the kids feel alone in that thing that they do with tech.
Let me just quickly interrupt you for a second, because I want to mention something about that. So you said whenever, I don't want for it to be the nanny whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed or I can't deal with them for a second. I want you to remind you that we all have our needs too. We sometimes forget as parents because we put our kids' needs over everything. But and in order to be good parents, we need a break too. And we need some us time. And sometimes it doesn't even mean like, go take a hot bath. Sometimes it means I need to do the dishes so that we have clean plates for dinner. So actually, I do think that it's good if it's, but again, for the next 30 minutes, I need to do the dishes and I need to send some emails and I need to do this. And I want to satisfy my kids' need because they want to watch TV. So for 30 minutes, their needs are going to be satisfied because they're going to be watching TV, and my needs are going to be satisfied as well because I'm going to get to do what I need to do. So I actually think, and again, the fact that you had those 30 minutes, maybe after that, you're like, oh, you're less overwhelmed. You're like, I got to do this, check it off my to-do list. I can be a better parent now. And your kid had 30 minutes to actually unplug and do a little bit of what they wanted. So now you can have a better, it's actually beneficial for the relationship. So I just want to mention, because again, that's the big guilt coming up, right? Like we feel like, oh, I can't do this, but sometimes it's actually okay. It's actually
healthy. No, I do agree. And I completely agree with you. I think I was thinking more about the extreme, right? So the extreme of that is, here's the TV, spend all the time that you want just because I cannot deal. So that's sort of, but I do agree. I mean, being healthy, not overwhelmed parents, it's actually a good thing for the kids. And whatever it takes to get there, like we've all done, crazy things there, I think it's absolutely worth it. And everything done in moderation, I think it's okay, right?
Absolutely. And again, in my book, I have a whole section I didn't go into detail here, but where I talk about how much is too much. And again, it varies. But I give you the research and some numbers and some, alternatives. And so, that's there since I wasn't able to cover it here.
So let's talk about The Learning Game. I'm super excited about this book. The book is coming out, I think, around September, 5th of September, if I'm not wrong. I'm going to be one of the first ones that pre-orders and buys it. I'm super, super excited. And I just want to know, how did you get to the idea of the book? I know that, having spoken to many people that have written books, it's almost like most of the people said, the book came to me. It was almost like it was in me. I had to bring it out. And I'm pretty sure, based on what you've told me and your experience and your journey, must have been something similar. So I'm very curious, how did the book come about? And also, what is your biggest objective with this book?
Yeah, so it's funny. The first thing I want to say is I never considered myself a writer. I never considered myself creative either. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like a lot of things that I talk about is the lessons we need to unlearn from school. I had a lot to unlearn before I realized I actually can write and I'm creative and I have worthy ideas to share that people can find interesting. So when I left teaching, I took an online course of writing called Rite of Passage by David Perel, one of my good friends. And that course taught me everything I learned in school about how to write and taught me how to write for modern times for a purpose to help out people and to find my purpose. And oh my gosh, this course sort of like changed my life. I took it at the right moment. I put all my hard work into it. And that's sort of what started connecting me to all these different people and helped me start we all have ideas and we're all passionate about something, but it's oftentimes not obvious. And I talk about this in the book too, how we parents can help our kids find that since they're little, so it's easier for them and they don't have to wait until they're adults like us and, trying to figure out, well, what is it that I'm really good at and that I can make a living out. So anyway, that course helped me realize what I had to offer the world and how I could do it. So I started writing a newsletter every Friday, like I mentioned, called Fab Fridays, where I would just share a lot of the research that I was doing and my experience from all these questions that I had from the system and from school and how kids learn and this and that. So that started to grow and grow and grow. And I was sharing bits of that through my Twitter account. And so it got to the point where the course taught me to be consistent and to say, okay, I'm going to send every Friday a newsletter. It doesn't matter what happens. I did miss a few times, of course, life got in the way, but just put something out there. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. Another thing that I have to really work on, this perfectionism idea, this forced me. I had to put a piece of writing every week out there into the world and get criticism and feedback and all this and sort of, and that really made the quality of my writing better. And because I did it consistently for over 2 years, it got to the point where I had a volume of newsletters / articles and ideas that had been passed through multiple filters of people that had, Ana, question this and question that. And I'm like, you're right. Let me change my thinking here. And so anyway, I perfectioned them. I make them better. And I think it was last year, I had different publishers starting to reach out and they were like, Ana, have you considered writing a book? And I was like, what? No, a book? Absolutely not. Because, I had this wrong misconception, a book, I'm not an author, I'm not a writer. Well, it turns out I had a volume of work done already that had compounded over the years. And so I was like, you know what? These are all my ideas up to date of education and what I feel education should be like. Let me just sort of put them all out there, figure out which ones are the most useful ones, find a storyline and expand them into chapters. And so that's what I did. And I had, the bulk of the work done already because I had been writing this every single week for over 2 years. And so again, the process of organizing it and filtering and what I want to include, what I don't, and then expanding them into chapters, it did take a year. And I was pregnant. And so that was a whole other level added to it. But it was an incredible experience and it was a big challenge. And I'm so happy because even if, this doesn't go anywhere, all my ideas are condensed in this one book and it's very actionable. And, if only one parent reads it and they are able to start thinking about education in a new way and do something different, even if it's small, but start doing things differently at home with their kids, then that's worth it for me. And so I'm very happy that I was able to do this project. I do start having ideas for next books. But it was an interesting process. It wasn't like usual authors that sit down and they start writing from scratch. I actually had a compiled thing of write-ups and sort of put them together into a storyline. And it's called The Learning Game.
I'll tell you a fun fact. So about 2 years ago, I found myself a bit stuck. Mm-hmm. And I had to figure out a way to unlearn a lot of the things that I was taught in my younger years. And I came across David Perel. And I didn't take the course, but I've read a lot of the newsletters and a lot of the articles. And that's how I came across you through one of his articles. And by reading what he was writing and by reading your story, I kid you not, that's how I started writing. Because about 2 years ago is when I started my first newsletter and my first podcast, which were called Overthink Big. Because I'm the biggest overthinker, but now I call myself a recovered overthinker because writing has helped me to really unlearn all of those things that you were talking about. So I'm a little bit of a self-taught, but self-taught only because I had great teachers in you and David remotely. We didn't know each other, that I was looking up to and sort of figuring out that there's something else and there's another way and there's another type of journey that can, unfold in front of us if we put some time and effort. Now, I didn't pursue Overthink Big because it was a little bit of a self-therapy at the time, but
Mm-hmm.
then it all evolved into Unmatched. And this is where I feel like I'm pouring all of my, heart and soul into, because I think it's connected to that spirit of uncovering what makes us all unique. And yes, I didn't get to do it when I was a child, but I get to do it now, and hopefully give people alternatives. So, I'm so honored that you joined me today, because, it's a full circle moment in this little journey of mine as well. And I guess one of the last questions that I have for you is, as a mom, what's your biggest hope for your child in the development and the
Mm-hmm.
learning game that awaits in front of him?
Oh, that he remains like that we're able to cultivate that curiosity, that he remains curious, because and that he finds something that's worth spending a lot of time and hard effort doing. I think that I was able to find that as an adult. A lot of it has to do because of all the things my mom did when I was little. Um, but yeah, I think that a big, reason why people like happy people are happy is because they're able to find that they remain curious until they found what it is that their passion or their purpose was in life, and then they poured their heart and soul into it. Sort of like what you were doing, what you just shared was beautiful, and it really moved me. I'm very happy to hear that. And so hopefully, that's my hope for my child, for him to find that, hopefully early on, and I will do everything in my power to enable that.
And I love that, because curiosity is the core of everything that I do. I think that's the one thing that saved me literally throughout this whole time, and helped me really unlearn all these things on my own. And I guess to link it to what we're all trying to do as parents, give our kids the best of the futures,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? The future sometimes looks grim, and the future right now seems complex. And there's so many layers of what's coming and what's not, and so much uncertainty. What's the one thing that we can teach kids in order to equip them for that future that we don't know about? And I love this quote that I heard once. Not really sure who said it, but the fact that the school system is teaching kids about the past, but they need to live in the future. So how do we educate our kids, not for the past, not even for today, because our today is their past, when they're grown up, but for the future that they're going to have to live in?
So definitely not content, because as we've seen, content changes dramatically, professions change dramatically. It's actually the soft skills that we talked about earlier, what's going to help them figure out and navigate this uncertain future, how to figure things out by themselves. They're going to have to do a lot of that, because we have, 2/3 of the kids graduating from school right now will end up doing jobs that haven't been invented, which means they're going to have to reinvent themselves over and over again. They're going to have to pivot and switch gears often, and they're going to have to figure things out when they have like no idea, where to even begin. So those are the soft skills that we talked about, and that we're working and training kids at Synthesis, because we believe that that's sort of the key to navigate chaos, uncertainty, and complexity, which is what the future looks like, right? And this empowers them to think for themselves, to embrace challenge, and go for it, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. And as I always say, I encourage people to find that things that makes them different,
Mm-hmm.
weird, unique, as I
Mm-hmm.
call it, unmatched, because that's the only thing that is not taken. Everything else is taken.
Yep.
But that essence of you and what you stand for is only yours.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not competing with anything else, because
Mm-hmm.
it's really something that you 100% own. So Anna, thank you so much for being on Unmatched today. Super happy to have had the honor to speak to you and learn from you today. And I hope to hear more from you. And I can't wait to have the book in my hands.
Thank you so much, Anna. This was wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.